I started using marker because I was having a really difficult time with the exactness of a pencil or a pen. That was more suited for details, so when I was working in my sketchbook, my work would get very tight, and that would translate over to my paintings being really tight. So a professor recommended I switch over to markers because you can get them in different sizes, they're permanent, and they work a lot more like a paintbrush. And as soon as I did that, my whole way of working changed for the better. Markers have been especially helpful for me because since I'm so focused on color, I've been able to figure out my color palettes with my markers ahead of time and then mix those exact colors for my paintings later. I built up my art marker collection over time. So I started out with just a few markers when I was 14 or so, and now I have a whole box of them of all different types. I started getting these really thick paint markers. They're Liquitex paint markers, so they have a really thick tip. And this is really good for blocking out certain colors that you want. You don't use it for detail, you're just getting gesture. They have different opacities, so some like this Prussian blue are really opaque, they're really dark. This yellow oxide, which are a little bit more transparent. So I can do some layering if I want, or I can have things super opaque. Another type of marker that I have a lot of are these Copic markers. And there are a few different types of Copic markers. This is a Copic Sketch. They have two different sides. One is a more traditional marker side, and the other is a brush tip. If I want something that's more calligraphic, I use the brush tip. If I want something more exact, I use the flat tip. And the point's really good for getting really small details. And then but it does have another side, which is again a flat. Copic markers are transparent. They're really good for blending. You can actually get Copic blenders that can blend the colors together. Some people are really into that. I mostly use my colors flat. They're a little bit on the expensive side. They end up paying for themselves because you can get refills for them. It comes in a bottle that's about this big, and whenever your marker runs out, you can just refill it with the ink and it'll last you forever. Prismacolor is great because the markers are a little bit cheaper. They also have two sides. They have the really thin side for detail, and then they have this broad side, which is a little bit bigger than the Copic ones, but smaller than the Liquitex markers. Prismacolor markers are also transparent, so they're better for blending or for layering, but you won't get that opaque paint marker-y quality. I also have some Faber-Castell, which I got from my sister, and these are mostly just their brush markers, also transparent. I'm really liking are these paint markers called Molotow. They're opaque, and they have this really nice, beautiful line quality to them. They have kind of a fat tip, but I think you can also get them in different sizes. There's a metallic line, and there's a neon line. The paint markers are a little bit tricky to take care of. Because they're paint, you have to watch out about the paint drying inside of the nib, because then you have to buy, there are nib replacements. You don't have to throw out the whole marker, which is a mistake that I made a whole bunch of times. You just have to look up the brand name, make sure you have the right size, and you'll get like a whole new nib. Always make sure that you shake them up before you use them, especially if you haven't used them in a long time. This gets the paint flowing in the marker. There's binder or medium in there that the pigment has to mix with. Otherwise, you're just going to get the medium coming out, and that'll get the paint all dried up in your marker when you get to the paint side of it. Also store them horizontal, so the paint's not all getting backed up either in the nib, which will cause it to dry, or in the end, which will get it all stuck to the bottom. I had this horrible experience on a plane where the marker just bled out onto the tray, and it's permanent marker, and it was a new plane, and I couldn't get it out, and it was awful. I've tried using markers on a bunch of different surfaces, and there are some that I really like and some that just didn't work out so well. I really like illustration board because it has a Bristol-like surface to it. It's very smooth, so it absorbs the marker in a very clean, clear-cut way. I also like how thick it is. A lot of the times with the markers, since they're alcohol or water or acrylic, it causes paper, regular paper, to warp. This is done with my markers, all the different types of markers I have, but the paper is kind of flimsy and warps a little bit on the side, and I don't think that looks very good. So I try not to use my markers on just regular paper. I would not use drawing paper because the toothiness of it absorbs the marker and the marker bleeds everywhere. I like Mylar because it has this lovely transparent quality to it, and it also takes so many different types of mark making, and it takes the markers just fine. The Liquitex markers have a really nice opacity since they're acrylic paint. So, and I also really love the thickness. So when I draw, it makes a nice dark thick line that's really satisfying. They also have a transparent version. I like how light these things are and how you can layer one on top of the other. This is a regular Copic marker, and it's got this thin line, which I use for detail stuff later, or filling in, if I'm filling in little areas and I don't want too much bleeding, I just go and use the really thin side. Sometimes when I'm drawing stripes, I'll use this side because I can get such regular lines. The other type of Copic marker that I like is the Copic Sketch. And I like that because they have this really nice brush pen. And whenever I'm doing more blending type stuff or want like a calligraphic kind of line, I can get different types of thicknesses there. I can put down a layer and then let that dry. And if I want it just a little bit darker but don't really want to blend another marker, I can just put another layer on top and it's a little bit darker. The Prismacolors are great because they're nice and firm. They're a little bit firmer than the Copics. I can do more detail work with these. The one thing to be careful about with the Prismacolor markers in particular is to always test them out before you buy them because their outside colors and their dots don't necessarily match the actual color that they are. So for the longest time I thought this was a red marker because it's kind of red, reddish brown. It's not a red marker at all. This is a tip, and it's actually really dark brown. And that's particularly a thing with Prismacolors. The Molotow markers are the newest type of marker that I'm using. They're really nice because I can get the metallic ones. I love shiny things. They're really opaque, so they make this really nice, solid purple. They come in two different sizes. I believe this is the thinner size. It gives you a line that's a little bit thicker than the Prismacolor or Copic points. So I've been doing this stuff on just my regular sketchbook paper, which is fine. It's nice and smooth. It gives a pretty good line quality. It makes the paper a little bendy, but it's my sketchbook. I don't care. If you try and do it on drawing paper or like a toothy paper, it's gonna bleed a lot. And maybe you want that, but for me that doesn't work so well. If you use one of the paint markers on it, it actually does this weird thing where the mark doesn't come out as smoothly because it's absorbing the ink really fast. The ink doesn't stay on the page long enough to pull across, so it can get kind of streaky and grainy. I really love working with color and pattern. I feel like it's a kind of puzzle that I have to put together. I love picking out color palettes and seeing how colors that are really muted respond to really bold colors. I love it when one color shifts based on what's around it. And pattern is the same way. I love how edges work with each other. I think I really like pattern because I see the world in repeating shapes. When I'm drawing from nature, for instance, I'm pulling out specific marks from the landscape. So a leaf is a kind of pattern to me, the way that looks. And the way gravel looks on the ground is another type of pattern. So with still lifes, it's kind of the same way. I'm looking for patterns that I can add to my language of mark making. Sometimes I go to the fabric store just to see what's in their scrap section, and I pick up whatever responds to me, and I don't really have an idea of how I'm going to use it, but then it ends up in my paintings or my drawings sometimes later. My sister gave me this beautiful handkerchief. She made it. I think it's a work of art in itself, but I think it looks like a cool nature backdrop, and I kind of wanted to use that. I'm putting the red down here because this red is a much stronger, heavier color than this green. This green is kind of neutral and a little bit pale. This is kind of like my sky area, and this is like my ground almost. But they connect because this red is in the same family as this red. Professor Lieu's kids had these dollies that they really were adamant about showing to me. They really wanted to show me them. And I thought they were just amazing. I had to draw them because I can't just take them home with me. They'd be so mad if I stole one. And they each have their own personality. I chose these particular swimsuits because I liked the different sizings of patterns and the colors that went with them. So we've got like a red and a green going on. We're going to add like a light blue. This is kind of risky. I feel like neon green, well, neon anything is risky business. To balance out that super bright green, I've got super bright pink. So I'm just pretending I'm creating a narrative here as we go. Sometimes still lives are more fun when you come up with a narrative for them or a reason why the objects are there. So these guys are like little cavemen on a vacation in the jungle, and they're going to be cooking a partridge. This is a really old partridge from Walmart in probably like the 70s or something. It's going to go right in there. There's going to be a nice plant in the background, makes it seem more real. I don't know where this is going to fit, but we'll figure it out. There, so this is like their little palm tree in the jungle, even though it's a jade plant. And they're just having a grand old time, and this is what's going to be my drawing. So while I'm really super psyched to draw the still life that I just made, I'm not going to follow it exactly. I don't usually stick with the colors that are in real life, or I'm not very concerned with how the shapes line up exactly. I'm using markers which are permanent, so once the mark is there, it's there. I just leave it alone. And you'll see how that comes together in the end and how this will be more of an inspiration and less the actual thing that goes on the paper. I like to choose like about 5 or 6 main colors that I'm going to mostly use. And then occasionally I'll pull in other colors later to add in. I really like this lime peel color. It's a little like chartreuse. I'm testing out colors to see which ones I want to use. There are several color palettes, like main color palettes, that I like to stick to, like a dark blue, a yellow oxide, or yellow ochre kind of color, an olive green, and a deep red like this red. So I'm kind of pulling from that, but then also trying to see how I can weave in some of these more acidic, intense neon colors. It's basically putting color worlds together. Like these all belong to one world, this kind of like manufactured color that didn't exist until like the past century. But like these colors are much more earthy, they're much more classical. I usually start out with the thick markers. I do this thing, just block out the large shapes first and like leave spaces for where the subjects are actually going to sit. Right now, so far, I just have the blocking in of the blanket and then the shadowy areas of each of these guys. The shadow isn't perfect, but I'll fill in the rest later. I started building a narrative around these creatures a little bit because they're so funny. And I think in this image, I'm going to try and make it look more, the word is not real, but more integrated, more lifelike, so that you're not focused on that objectness. I know I'm probably not alone in like always feeling like my work is horrible while I'm doing it. In fact, I remember being in Professor Lieu's class and I was doing a charcoal drawing and it was getting super, super, super tight and I was focusing on these details and she's just like, let it go, be like, stop worrying about how it looks like right now, just let it go. And it was so hard for me to do. I don't go bigger than a 9 by 12 inch sheet of paper because the markers don't have that much ink inside of them. Markers have fairly small tips to them. It doesn't make any sense to use a small tip on a large surface. You're just going to be working at the same thing like forever and ever and ever. Secondly, like I don't like these markers are expensive. I don't want the juice to be wasted on something that I could just do with paint. I've put in the leaves of the jade plant now. It's giving me more of a sense of place now. Everything is pretty blocked in for the most part. I'm gonna add some of those red fern things in there in the back here, and I'm excited for that because I really like that pattern. I added this vermilion around all of the leaves here, see, because first it's a good painting move. It creates a vibration having the similar toned red against the green. In the jade plant, there is a little bit of red around each of the leaves. I made a little bit of a screw up here. I did background before adding in the branches on the jade plant, and for the background I used an opaque marker, and you can't use a transparent marker over an opaque marker, so I'm going to have to pull out the Big Gun paint marker black at the end to kind of fix that. The black is that is the boldest and the darkest and the most intense you can possibly get. And I actually try not to use at least the opaque black at all in my drawings because it overpowers everything. Leave it till the end, and then only if it's absolutely necessary. In this case, I feel like it's going to be necessary, but we'll see. During the intermission, one of Professor Lieu's daughters was very upset that I had taken these lovely creatures here, which are her dolls, and so she took them back. You can take apart your still life and put it back together. It'll be okay. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. If you're going to leave your still life for a while, it might be a good idea to take a picture of it with a camera or cell phone, just in case it gets moved around later. This is one of the weirder still lives I've ever done ever. I think I've learned a lot from this process, and that I can use something as silly as these dolls and turn them into a fairly convincing image. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I did making it, because I had a blast. So for instance, sorry. Yeah, that was pick up ones that Clara, you're distracting me.